Good morning, everyone, and welcome to tuning in. It's great to be back here at the Picture House Central for a morning of all things radio and audio. My name's Matt Payton. I'm Chief Executive of Radiocentre, and I always think my first task at these events is to try and retain a fraction of the energy and enthusiasm you just heard on our audio montage there, especially the competition winner screaming away, showing the emotional power of radio right there. But my main job this morning is actually to set the scene and make a few opening remarks about what we've got coming up and how our agenda all fits together, and how this reflects some of the exciting developments happening in audio, and touch on some of the things that we've been doing to help unlock the audio advantage for the benefits of advertisers, for audiences, and for our members. But before I get into that, I also think it's worth reflecting on some of the changes and the changing context since we were last here 12 months ago. It's often said that the only constant in life is change itself. And now, while that might be a bit of a cliche, that's probably because it's true. And in recent years especially, it's felt like the pace of change has been accelerating, driven partly by developments in technology, but also the tumultuous political and economic changes that we've been living through and the uncertainty that that's created. And while I'm not expecting things to change too radically, I am naturally an optimist, and I believe there are some positive signs amidst the gloom. For example, on the economy, there's clearly a huge job to be done, but there are also positive signs if you look hard enough, with growing confidence in important sectors like advertising. And on the political and regulatory front, whatever your views, we've had a lot of change in recent years. 6 prime ministers in 8 years is just not normal. But given the size of the current government's majority, you wouldn't expect that to continue either. Of course, we're going to have to see how any of this pans out in practice, but for me and the team at Radiocentre, it is really important to think about this context when planning our strategy, our activity, and our events. We don't operate in a vacuum and need to be thinking constantly about what's on the horizon to deliver our strategic goals, namely to help advertisers to see radio differently and invest in audio, to communicate radio's central role as part of the evolving audio world, and to shape and influence the operating environment so that radio can grow and realise its potential. So, taking that broader view into account has also helped us determine our themes for today. As I've already mentioned, and you will have seen on your way in, our focus this morning is on unlocking the audio advantage. And to help us explore and explain this, we've got a fantastic range of speakers who you can see here. And they'll be covering all manner of topics, but we've grouped them broadly into sessions covering innovation, connection, and effectiveness. Innovation, which is driving reach and interest in radio, including the new stations, such as the ones launched by Global only last week, developments in AI, or using music in different ways. Connection, especially with audiences, providing a resonance that few other media can rival. Something we'll bring to life with presentations showcasing the Bauer Rayo platform and from the Capital Breakfast team. And effectiveness by delivering results for clients, illustrated by new case studies from Specsavers and Voxy Mobile. But before we bring on our first speakers this morning, I also want to take stock of the position of commercial radio and audio in 2024. And as part of this, I think it's always worth reminding ourselves we start from a position of relative strength. In fact, we ran a survey with ad agency customers earlier this year, which found that audio was the media channel most likely to be identified as being on the up and having positive momentum, with 86% of respondents agreeing with this. And that provides us with a great platform, but perhaps shouldn't be too surprising when you consider the strength of our audience. A record 40 million people tuning in each week to commercial radio, up by more than 4 million in the last 2 years alone. Also delivering its highest ever share of listening compared to the BBC, riding high at 55%. Incredibly, even average hours are growing, with audiences listening for around an hour longer than in 2022. A remarkable achievement when you consider the level of competition now for audience time. Of course, commercial radio is now part also of a much broader audio market, competing for audiences and advertising alongside podcasts and streaming platforms. But the good news is that overall listening to these services is also expanding, up by 16% since 2019, according to Radar Midas. Now, to be clear, this is listening hours on platforms where you can actually buy advertising, including non-BBC podcasts, free streaming services, and commercial radio. And it's great to see these commercially available audience hours continuing to grow and expand the size of the cake. What's more, we know that the vast majority of these listening hours are accounted for by live commercial radio, representing 86% of the total, with a further 10% being to commercial podcasts and 4% to free streaming services with ads. So you can see why radio remains the centerpiece of those audio advertising campaigns that deliver the biggest impact. But the strength of audio listening is only part of the story. Revenues have also seen significant growth over the past 10 years, despite the continuing shift in advertising budgets to digital media over this period. And while there was an inevitable dip during COVID, these revenues have bounced back strongly and remain ahead of pre-pandemic levels. And the good news is that looks set to continue. In fact, I can announce today that revenues for the first half of 2024 have been confirmed as being up 5% year on year. And while it's probably a bit early to be making end-of-year predictions, if that level of growth can be maintained in line with the Advertising Association's forecasts, we could be looking at one of the best ever years for commercial radio. But there's always more to do in terms of making the case for investment in radio and highlighting its effectiveness. With this in mind, Radiocentre's Insight team prepared a new study earlier this year called the Performance Multiplier. This new research highlights how the impact of radio ads is being significantly underestimated by current performance attribution methods. It also demonstrates radio's efficiency in driving both short-term web response and providing additional brand-building benefits. Or to put it more simply, as we did in our recent marketing campaign, radio advertising can help you have your cake, there it is, with increased web sessions, and eat it too with greater brand salience. A really important message, especially for performance marketers, but actually a real advantage for advertisers of all kinds. But of course, the benefits of radio go beyond just the results for advertisers. It's also a force for good in society, not only because of the strength of its connection and its resonance, but also because of the high levels of trust that it retains. Now, you may have seen this map before. It is a bit of a Radiocentre favourite, but radio in the dark blue is well established as the most trusted medium across Europe and has been for over a decade, according to the European Commission. Data in the UK also backs this up, with radio news consistently coming out top for trust, including in our latest research, which we conducted earlier this year, cutting through with a wide range of audiences at key times of day. But the pace of change in technology and consumer behaviours also prompted discussions with government and regulators about how we secure this valuable contribution into the future. In fact, support for radio's public value was a key reason it featured in the government's Media Act, which passed into law back in May. This critical piece of legislation acknowledges the special status and impact of commercial radio stations, bringing in new powers to support the access, discoverability and availability of UK radio, which is particularly important as more listening migrates online. Because of course this is a trend we've seen accelerate in recent years, driven partly by the growth principally by the growth in smart speakers like the Amazon Alexa, which have become a significant platform for radio listening in the UK. Because while these smart devices offer many functions and will inevitably get even smarter, we know that a lot of the time they're just being used as clever radios. According to Radar, the vast majority of listening time on smart speakers, around 70%, is to live radio. And we can see that impact coming through with the total share of radio listening now happening online, up to a record 28% of all listening, and actually even higher for commercial radio at 32%, doubling in share over the past 4 years as these devices take hold. And it's clear that smart speaker listening, the orange shade now on this chart, represents the lion's share of this growth, now accounting for 17% of all listening and the majority of online radio listening. As a result, radio is becoming even more reliant on tech platforms, particularly Amazon and Google, to reach audiences. And while these relationships have been pretty positive so far, this creates real risks for the future, especially if the platforms look to exploit their position as gatekeepers to radio content. But I'm pleased to say, following a lot of hard work, we managed to secure support for radio to address exactly these issues in the Media Act. So what does the Media Act do exactly? Well, it looks to secure the future of radio on these voice assistant platforms. Specifically, it'll introduce new obligations on the platforms to ensure that radio is always available and discoverable, that it's provided reliably when requested by listeners, that there's no fees for making radio available, and that platforms can't overlay their own advertising. And also, importantly, that broadcasters can choose their default streaming route, which might be their own app, like a global player or Rayo, or an aggregator like TuneIn or Radio Player. Now, in order to get these powers through Parliament, we obviously needed to work with politicians on all sides, including the then Conservative ministers and Labour shadow ministers. And obviously there's been quite a lot of changes since then, since the general election. But we were pleased to see at least some familiar faces assume responsibility for radio, media and advertising in the new government. Notably for us, that included Stephanie Peacock MP as Media Minister at DCMS. Now, unfortunately, Stephanie can't be with us this morning, but she did send us this message.
I was delighted when Radiocentre asked me to address you this morning, and I'm sorry that I cannot be there in person. Nonetheless, I wanted to at least reflect today on the importance of the UK commercial radio sector. The enduring presence of radio in our lives is a testament to the sector's ability to innovate and evolve. Almost 90% of the population still tune into the radio each week, where they find trusted news, entertainment and music. At the heart of radio's popularity is the unique relationship listeners have with their favourite commercial stations. Listeners value commercial radio news, trust the regular updates and appreciate the companionship that presenters offer. The partnerships that commercial radio and the team at Radiocentre develop with advertisers are integral to the value that listeners place on radio. These partnerships have supported commercial radio's ability to reach audiences across the UK, while also delivering an important public value to diverse audiences. However, we know that radio listening habits are changing, particularly with the steady shift to digital listening and the growth of podcasts. Radio also faces increasing competition from online audio and streaming platforms. We strongly support measures in the Media Act that protect radio's carriage on smart speakers, and we are working closely with Ofcom on their implementation. We also fully support measures that strengthen requirements on local news and services, which ensure that radio remains a highly trusted source of information within the media landscape. And I know from my constituents in Barnsley just how important this is. I cannot wait to build on the partnerships that DCMS has with the UK's commercial radio sector as it adapts to these future changes. And I'm looking forward to working with Matt and his brilliant team in helping to secure radio's long-term future.
Really nice message there, almost like we could have written that ourselves. And I promise, despite some of the editing, that wasn't a deep fake. It's a genuine article. But there's no doubt that continued support from Stephanie, along with Lisa Nandy as Secretary of State at DCMS, is going to be crucial during this time of change. And as you'll gather, the early signs are pretty good. They seem to have the right instincts on a number of issues and are crucially committed to implementing the Media Act. They also appear to be making the right noises, at least so far, on the future of the BBC. And that's really important, as the BBC is still the biggest single player in UK audio. And as the audio market develops, we'll continue to work alongside and compete with the BBC across a range of different platforms. Now, in many ways, that's business as usual. We've always competed fiercely with the BBC for audiences, and we know that competition is a fact of life. But competition also needs to be on terms that are fair and reasonable and takes into account the huge funding and promotional advantages of the BBC. What it shouldn't mean is the BBC launching copycat radio stations that could put commercial services out of business, or starting to run advertising across its audio and podcast output that's already been paid for by the licence fee. Now, don't get me wrong, the BBC is a fantastic institution and it has a really important role to play in audio. But it also needs proper guardrails in place as it looks to drive its own digital expansion. So what do all these developments tell us about the prospects for radio and audio in 2024? Well, hopefully it shows the fundamentals of radio and audio remain strong and that access to radio is vital in securing its future. But it also demonstrates radio is now part of a much broader audio market. And against this backdrop, Radiocentre has been evolving too to ensure we're reflecting the changes happening in the world around us. With the publication of an action plan report last year, setting out our vision for the future and announcing a formal change in our remit to represent and promote all forms of audio provided by commercial radio. Something you can now see coming through in our policy work, but also in our research and marketing, which considers radio as part of this much broader audio market. But watch this space, there's more to come, and in truth, we're just getting started on that. So that's it from me for now. I'll be back at the end to provide a brief summing up, invite you to join us for a light lunch later at the members' bar. But hopefully that's provided with a flavour of what we're covering today and why, how this reflects the reach, resonance and results delivered by radio, and how commercial radio and Radiocentre is evolving to help unlock the audio advantage. Thanks for listening.